Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Kiley. I'm the Communications Director here at the University of Wisconsin Clinical Trials Institute. On behalf of our entire team at the Institute, I want to wish you all a happy Clinical Trials Day and welcome you to today's webinar. A Clinical Trials Day was established to provide an opportunity to reflect upon and recognize all that has been accomplished thanks to clinical trials and the people behind them. This includes not only the many outstanding clinical research professionals at UW-Madison and UW Health, but also our incredible and courageous patient participants, one of whom you will meet today, who are critical partners in our effort to move medicine forward and help improve the health of individuals and communities in Wisconsin and beyond. So we want to send heartfelt thanks to all of you on campus and in our community who go above and beyond to help advance clinical trials innovations at UW. You all are all part of a community that is truly powered by purpose, which is the tagline for Clinical Trials Day nationally. To those of you who may be new to clinical trials, today's discussion will have a lot of great information for you. And moving forward, please consider our institute, which can be found at uwclinicaltrials.org, to be an informational resource for you for any questions you may have about clinical trials at UW, whether that's participation or just general knowledge. Each year for Clinical Trials Day, we host a session that highlights a groundbreaking clinical trial at UW with perspectives from a researcher as well as a participant to help us better understand the opportunities and challenges involved in participating in a clinical trial. Today, we're pleased to welcome our panelists, Dr. Sara McCoy and Julianne McGowan, and our moderator, Tamara Kemkin-Mering. And I want to thank you all for being here and taking the time to join us today. As we move along, please add any questions to the Q&A section or to the chat, and we'll address them during the Q&A portion of the program. Also note that this session is being recorded and will be shared with all registrants after the event. And with that, I'll hand it off to Tamara to get us started.
Thank you, Kevin. I am very excited to be here talking with this group. We had a preemptive meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I love hearing people's stories, both Dr. McCoy and Julianne. They will talk about how they met, how their paths crossed. And as Kevin said, just the gratitude for everybody involved in clinical trials is so overwhelming, and I am very happy to be a part of Clinical Trials Day to bring some of this information to all of you. My background is that of a clinical research nurse. I have been a clinical research nurse since 1996. I've worked in direct care as a coordinator, and I'm currently the clinical nurse specialist on the clinical research units, plural, at UW Health. So we see a lot of different patient participants in clinical trials, and I love the powered by purpose statement. That is so much of what we do, and also just working today to make tomorrow a little bit better. So I am thrilled to introduce Dr. Sara McCoy, who will be talking about her trial, her participation in this Sjögren's trial specifically, but some of the other things that she's done and how she got here. So Dr. McCoy, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much for highlighting our clinical trial in Sjögren disease. It's really important, not only, I think, at the individual level, but to our disease as a whole. So I guess I'll start off by telling people what is Sjögren disease. Right? So this is an autoimmune disease. It's one of many, but this particular one attacks the glands that make tears and saliva predominantly. And that leads to very severe dry eye and dry mouth. And I think this disease in particular is hidden because most people can't imagine a lack of tears and saliva. But I think Julianne can probably do it very well. But to paint the picture a little bit, our patients' eyes are so dry they can't sleep through the night, they can't read, driving is difficult, flying is difficult because of the air, and many cannot see because of it. It can become vision threatening. And dry mouth, it's hard to imagine not being able to eat or talk, but the severity of their dry mouth causes impaired basic quality of life activities on a day-to-day basis. And I could go on about it. So these patients are very symptomatically burdened. And despite this, and the fact that it's one of our most common autoimmune diseases we see in rheumatology, there's no FDA-approved disease-modifying therapy. And when we talk about therapies to treat dry eye or dry mouth, some of our mainstay of therapies have been around since the 1800s. So there's been very little innovation in this field. So why do I contribute to clinical research? Well, I think everybody in healthcare has the same goal, which is at whatever level they can to make patients' lives better. And I'm lucky enough to hear from my patients on a daily basis. And when we hear about a gap, sometimes we want to help in whatever way we can. And I am fortunate to have a skill set both in the clinical realm where I can diagnose Sjögren's with very specific tests, but also I have a really talented group at the bench and wet lab, meaning working in actual bench science. And so it's really a privilege for me to be able to connect the two skill sets and take the bench, the things we do in the lab, and bring it to the clinic to try to help our patients. And every time my patients tell me their story, whether or not I can help, it helps me paint the picture of where we need intervention. And so this trial was to try to address one of those major gaps that I was seeing in clinic.
Thank you. I do just have a couple of questions for you. Just very generally, what is a clinical trial? And then specifically, this Sjögren's clinical trial, what is special about it? How did you decide to do this? Where did the idea come from, other than the inspiration from your patients and wanting to help?
Yeah, so what is a clinical trial in general? So it's not just treating someone, right? It's a very controlled environment. So there's an intervention with a pre-specified outcome of either efficacy, how well the intervention works, or safety. And the difference between this and just what drugs you get over the counter, medications you get over the counter, is that these clinical trials have very refined and defined inclusion and exclusion criteria. And at different levels of the trial, they have different inclusion-exclusion criteria, but ultimately you want to create a very similar population so that you can test if the intervention makes a difference and reduce variability. Usually you'll have primary and secondary endpoints. The primary is the one that, geez, if this works, the trial succeeds. And secondary are all the other neat questions that you want to answer in a trial. And then usually we have 3 phases of a trial, 1, 2, and 3. And phase 1 is going to be our safety. Is this safe enough where we can go on and study it in a larger population? Phase 2, we do our initial does it work in a very defined patient population. And the phase 3 trial, we loosen up those inclusion-exclusion criteria a little bit to reflect the general population more and really look at a broader level to see if the intervention works. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see a little bit about our trial. Share, and perfect. Okay. Okay, so our trial is a study of bone marrow derived mesenchymal stromal cells, or stem cells. I call them MSCs for short because mesenchymal stromal cells is too long. And what we do is we have our patient come in, we do the bone marrow biopsy, and we get these stem cells and we expand them, meaning just like a garden, we grow them out. And then we treat them with a little bit of a protein to make them extra active. And then we freeze them down. And that's really handy because then we can wake them up and we can give them to the patient. And we would be able to give them iteratively, meaning we could give them again, or we could give more or less because we have a lot frozen down. Now, in this study, what we're injecting is the salivary glands, specifically the submandibular glands. Everybody can feel them. They live under your chin right here, and they make 80% of our saliva, which is why we targeted these. So here, obviously, we're saying, wow, my patients have terrible dry mouth. They can't swallow, they can't speak. They have to use all of these expensive over-the-counter agents. But if we inject these stem cells into the salivary glands, our hope is that in this situation, they'll make more saliva and their dry mouth will get better. Now, the FDA in this study required that we did just one side before doing the other. So we're sort of in a pre-phase 1 because for our actual phase 1, we want to do both glands. But for this one, we're just doing one side. And so like I mentioned, we have pretty strict inclusion-exclusion criteria for this initial study. So our patients have to either have Sjögren disease or graft versus host disease, both of which are an immune cause of dry mouth. And they have to actually be very dry. So that we have a very specific measurement of low saliva production. They have to be older than 18, they have to be functional, they have to have two of these glands. And then, of course, we wouldn't want someone to get pregnant while they're under a study because we don't know the effects. And then we exclude patients who only have, again, one gland, if they've had stones that block duct, if they have other causes of dry mouth like kidney disease, diabetes, or they use things to help dry them out, if they have untreated thrush, and then safety things like, we don't want, if you've had recent cancer, probably you shouldn't be in this trial. If you're increasing your doses of drugs to address your immune system, if you don't have a long life expectancy, those sorts of things. And in this particular study, because it's close to a phase 1, our first goal is to make sure that this is safe and tolerable for our patients who have dry mouth. But then we have other questions too, like, well, if we give these MSCs, do we improve the actual quality of life of our patients? Do we make them feel better? Do we make more saliva? Is the saliva we make of better quality? We look at ultrasounds to see if the gland actually looks different. And then we want to start planning for a larger phase 2 study down the road. So that's a big part of this trial as well.
The visuals were awesome. And I actually just had a class learning about stem cells and all of that. And it was fascinating to see the different areas that they're being used. Can you talk about some of the challenges with this clinical trial in particular, and the fact that this was your own, right? This a pharmaceutical company didn't come to you and say, hey, let's look at doing this, that this is something that was your own thought, idea, dream. But what were some of the challenges that you had going from that wet bench when, yes, that's an even more controlled situation, into the patient population?
I would liken clinical trials to the most complicated of dances. I mean, I think it's heavily dependent on the team, and this is more than even sports teams I grew up in. There's no I in this team for sure. Every person on that team has a defined role, and I think the intricacies involved in clinical trials, because everything has to be documented, done correctly. And if even there's one thing that goes wrong, it can have major implications for the patient. So I think that the most challenging part is building the team and starting to work with the team and defining roles within the team. And then also, how do you deal with things when they go wrong, right? I think it's almost inevitable. There's something that you missed, whether it's small, tiny, or big, they all need to be addressed. There cannot be an error in a clinical trial that you don't address. And so I think that part of the challenge is, okay, as we start this first trial, first in world, well, when we come across a problem, how do we address that as a team, right? How do we work together to solve the problem in an efficient way that keeps patients safe and helps our intervention move forward?
What are some of the potentials that you see this trial that could possibly be carried forth into larger trials, or the innovation in clinical research? Because this is extremely innovative. It is on the cutting edge. How does that resonate with you?
I think, again, it's outside the box, right? So I get to see patients like Julianne, and I hear, as I said, I hate not being able to do things, but a lot of times what my patients tell me I can't help with. But sometimes you hear it over and over again and you identify this gap. And then you say, okay, well, these are the things that I'm aware of in the science world that I could maybe use to plug this gap. And in the case of stem cells, I think it really is a fascinating and innovative therapeutic tool that has been studied, but most products haven't been brought forward, which is really what we want to work hard to do. And we've actually built a very effective team here at UW, comprising people like Jacques Alipo, Randy Kimple, and Grace Blitzer, and actually a huge team beyond that not only support this trial, so thank you to my clinical trials team, by the way, they're awesome, but also will help hopefully move this from a pre-phase 1 to phase 1, and then to be clinically available to our patients. Because as you might imagine, I get a lot of emails and inquiries from our patients, but not everyone can be in a clinical trial. So really, if we want to help patients with these innovative products, we have got to move them outside of academia and let others have access to them. And so it's built, again, that's another team, right? You can't do it alone, especially with these therapeutic interventions.
I want to take just a step back and ask, what is the prevalence of Sjögren's in the general population? Because I don't think it's huge, but how did you get interested in this? Why is this your passion?
Sjögren's, we actually don't 100% know. We would put it around 1% of the population, if we had to guess. But dry eyes and dry mouth are so prevalent, around a third. I bet a bunch of people on this call have had dry eyes or dry mouth at some point, or cavities for no good reason. And then you have to think, do I have Sjögren's? Right? So about a third of you will be asking that question to yourself. But about one-tenth of people with severe dry eyes, dry mouth will actually have Sjögren's. So in our diseases, it's one of the most common, but it's not the most common overall. And the absolute reason I went into this is because in rheumatology, I think that Sjögren's is the disease that has the least therapies available, as in no disease-modifying therapies and very few symptomatic therapies that work without a lot of side effects. Just
So
seeing how.
what, yeah, one of the things that you had mentioned is the inclusion exclusion criteria, that it is a very controlled situation when you're running a clinical trial, the people who are participating. So sometimes it is hard to get diverse patient populations. Why is that important for clinical research in general when we're talking about future of health and wellness and the importance of diversity in these trials?
So when we deploy therapies like this in clinical trials, it will ultimately, hopefully, if we translate it to our patients in the community, it will be used in people of all different ages, sexes, origins, and patients in the community, they're different. You know, every single person is different from the person next to them, even if they have one disease. And so we ultimately want to make sure a therapy will work in the population it is meant to be used for. And if the safety and efficacy, meaning how well it works, differ between different groups that make them different in the population, that needs to be determined in clinical trials before it's utilized broadly. So it's imperative that you have good connections with the community, so you know what your overall therapeutic community looks like, and that you try to recruit patients into your clinical trial, again, to prevent a lack of efficacy or safety signals that could have been identified in the clinical trial phase.
So I have heard the story, but I love it. How did you and Julianne meet? How did she end up having this disease and sitting in your clinic?
So Julianne walked through our door around 2 years ago, and we do have a Sjögren's clinic. I think that was around seventh in the nation, and now there's another one that was just started in the Midwest, but there aren't many clinics that look at this. And so Julianne came our way, and we were really excited to meet her. And she is profoundly symptomatically burdened by this disease. And that's sort of what I was trying to describe before, but I bet she can do a better job because she walks in those shoes every day. And part of what we do in that first visit is we just talk about the patient's burden and experience. And as she was talking about her severe dryness, which is, not to this severity in every patient, it came to my mind that she would be potentially a good candidate for this trial. And I do multiple clinical trials in my Sjögren's clinic, and I try to present it as an option to those patients who it sounds like they would be a good fit for it. And this one, because specifically it targets that dry mouth and the symptom of dry mouth as compared to others, is why we presented it to Julianne specifically. So we discussed what this trial was and whether or not she might be interested in. Whether or not she knew it, she volunteered to be the first in the world for this exact sort of trial.
I love the way that you describe presenting it, that this is an option. Sometimes I think that clinical trials or participation in clinical trials is forced because maybe there, well, in this case, might not be other options. but viewing it as a treatment potential, a treatment option for our patients, really, I think opens it up to our patients and those who might participate. I love that that's a conversation that you have. So Julianne, I want to hear your version of your story, specifically to start with. How did you meet Dr. McCoy?
Well, how I met Dr. McCoy, I'm going to take a step back. And first of all, thank you to UW Health for inviting me to speak to all of you today, the important people. So it's a real honor and privilege to be here to share my experience in the xerostomia clinical trial for Sjögren's patients. Two hard words to pronounce for some people. But I received my diagnosis in 2017. And I was completely stunned with the limited number of treatment options for Sjögren's patients. And so from those early days, I found 4 things that helped because nobody knew anything. Doctors, they didn't know how to say Sjögren's, some of them. So I focused on 4 things, and that was really diet, exercise, stress, and sleep management to help me control my symptoms. But those only go so far, and I needed help. And I believe in Mr. Rogers' saying that you look for the helpers in difficult times. And so in December of 2022, I was having some difficult times with my symptoms, and I knew the 4 specialists my primary care physician were sending me to they were not going to help me. And so I turned to YouTube and I typed in Sjögren's, and up pops this UW Health Grand Rounds video titled Sjögren's Beyond the Basics. That was from December 2021, which had a young doctor who was fighting a very bad cough throughout the hour-long presentation. And that was Dr. McCoy. It took me 3 hours to get through that video because this was a doctor-to-doctor presentation, not a doctor-to-patient presentation. And so I had to stop every few minutes and write down what Dr. McCoy was saying. I had to look up the terminology to figure out how it applied to me. And I still have that notebook, which is outside of my reach right now. I wanted to show that. And I still have the notes. And in the video, Dr. McCoy mentioned mesylcrystal stromal cells, the MSCs, and I had no idea what that was. And I never wrote down anything in my notebook about that, the mesylcrystal stromal cells. I wrote down up until that point, and then I started after that point. So is it ironic that I'm here today? But it was about minute 43 in the video, which Dr. McCoy said, we have the Sjögren's clinic in Madison, Wisconsin. I lived 4 hours away at the time, and I immediately sent my rheumatologist a MyChart message saying, please refer me to Dr. McCoy. And within 48 hours, I had an appointment to see Dr. McCoy, 2 months later. After that first visit, that 2-hour-long visit, I was driving back to my hotel, and I cried the whole entire way because I finally found my helper. And everyone here is a helper to those of us who are in difficult times. And so that is why I'm excited to share my experience with you today.
I just think that is the most wonderful story that, paths crossed, kind of the universe aligned. I would like to know, you said that you were diagnosed in 2017. How long did it take you to get a diagnosis?
It took me about 3 or 4 years. You start to feel the symptoms. And so I started having dental problems. I had the dry eye, then the dry mouth started. Then in 2017, the digestive issues really started. And, you're not making saliva impacts your ability to start digesting food and, chewing your food and the types of food that you can eat. And so it really took, 3 to 4 years by the time that I could be diagnosed.
That must have been difficult, not having the answers. That's a long time. So why are you sharing your experience with us today? I find it a fascinating experience. I think what you've said so far is very heartfelt. But why is it important for you to tell all of us here and some other people out there about your experience?
So, for participating in the Sjögren's trial, there are two reasons. And the first reason is I wanted to help Dr. McCoy find treatments for myself and for others. And this trial, regardless of what the results are giving the researchers the data which can be used for future studies and future treatments. So it's not a waste of time, regardless if it works or not. It's just building blocks, to get to the next level. I also am using what's called autologous serum tears to treat my dry eye, and that's one of my symptoms. And so basically, it's a customized eye drop created using my own blood serum, which promotes natural healing of my eyes. So I'm using a part of me to help heal me, and I felt very comfortable participating in this clinical trial because I'm using my own bone marrow to be injected in my salivary gland. And again, using a part of me to heal me.
So that sounds scary in some ways when we're talking about bone marrow and some of the images that Dr. McCoy was showing. So when she spoke with you at one of your clinic visit and said, there are clinical trials. How would you feel about participating in a clinical trial? What was your first reaction? Had you thought of that before she brought it up?
So I was asked a few years before to join a clinical trial for Sjögren's ophthalmology for a drug study. And the ophthalmologist wasn't the lead ophthalmologist for the study. And so I thought about, he says, think about it. And so I thought about it until I reached the exit door of the clinic, and then I didn't think about it again. And so with Dr. McCoy, she brought this up. I don't know if this was her strategy or not, but she brought this up, the very first visit, second visit, the third visit. So she planted that seed, she watered it, and then she waited for it to grow. And then I was, ripe for picking, basically. So, so, so when she brought it up, I thought back to the ophthalmologist, but I also, I'm at a point where, my mouth is so dry and it's impacting so many things. You get to a point of being devastated. And, what options do you have? And if she's offering an olive branch here, we could possibly, fix this for you. I signed up.
And so tell us about the consent process, the information that was shared, and what your maybe expectations or what you thought was going to happen when you enrolled compared to what that really was like. Because there's a lot of expectation. There's a lot that you need to do to be a part of a clinical trial. It's more than just going to the clinic every couple of weeks.
Well, the first thing I said is I don't want to be patient one.
What patient were you?
I'm patient one. So since this was my first clinical trial, I really had very few expectations. I wanted to help myself primarily, and then secondarily is help other people, because it's really exciting to be part of a clinical trial to promote something that many people, not just Sjögren's patients, have. I know this clinical trial is very specific to Sjögren's patients, but if it works with us, then why can't it work for other things? And so really my expectations were, when I first signed up, and I kept asking the question, is it gonna hurt? I don't know about that bone marrow extraction. I think that might hurt. And so everybody's like, no, it's not going to hurt at all. And I talk to people, yes, it's going to hurt. But anyway, there's really short-term pain for long-term gain. And so my expectation was really that, what was going to hurt. And then really I knew to expect the unexpected. I was a healthcare IT project manager for 14 years, and I know what Go Live Day looks like. And so I knew to expect something may come up, but I knew that the clinical team, they had the plans in place, and they knew that, you know, if there were missing supplies, how to get them, missed instructions, how to get them. And we all knew that, you know, these are minor bumps in the road. And so we just know that something may go wrong, or just something pops up that's unexpected, and we just deal with it. And so I knew that as being a healthcare IT project manager. And again, you know, I wanted to help myself. I wanted to help the clinical team, help myself, and, you know, a greater population that suffer from dry mouth.
So what was it like being the first person to receive this treatment?
Like I said, I specifically asked the coordinator not to be patient one. So I found out I was patient one at my pre-procedure examination, but I did not find out I was going to be, you know, patient one in the world until 3 months after I received the salivary injection. And so Dr. McCoy had called me to let me know, hey, this is kind of a big deal. And you're the first in the world. I mean, this clinical trial is the first in the world. And I just happened to be the first patient that received the treatment. And so I don't think, you know, on the phone, I think the both of us, I don't know if she remembers, but I think we paused a little bit and just saying the word out, you know, the phrase out loud, first in the world. So I don't think either one of us set out to be the first. I think that we, you know, saw a problem that needed solving, and that was our focus, my focus in participating, you know, to help solve the problem of dry mouth.
That is really inspiring, because, I mean, that's what a trailblazer is. You're the first to do something, and so thank you for that. I'm sure that it was scary, but I'm glad to hear that the team around you was supportive and you have had a positive experience. What were some of the challenges that you faced during the participation in this trial? You said that you lived 4 hours away when you first started seeing Dr. McCoy.
Well, when I first started seeing her, I lived 4 hours away. And when she brought it up, I think it was the third time she brought it up again. And I said, well, you're in luck. I just closed on my condo 15 minutes away. So I moved to Madison in part to be closer to Dr. McCoy and to be able to participate in this trial. And so, you know, the challenges really are about, you know, overcoming, you know, becoming comfortable with clinical trials. You know, I had to get comfortable with it. And I think that might be what other people are thinking too, because being in a clinical trial is not at the top of people's to-do list. And I was actually talking with a coworker of mine about being in this clinical trial, and she said, you know, no way would I do this because, you know, it's the unknown. I just wouldn't feel comfortable about it. And so I told her a story about a friend of mine who in the 1990s had cystic fibrosis. And he dedicated the last few years of his life to participating in studies. And sometimes flying all over the country. And as coworkers, we donated our vacation time to allow him to do that. And at the time in the 1990s, the average life expectancy for cystic fibrosis was 28 years old. And now it's 40 to 50 years old. And I know his contributions made a difference. And I know his story really resonated with me. I mean, that came up when I was thinking about this clinical trial. And I just felt like I had to participate, because if he didn't, he wouldn't, you know, we wouldn't have these advances. If I don't, not that this is a life, you know, ending situation, but how do we just move the ball forward, and how do we do these trials and bring treatments to the broader population? And so ultimately it gives you, our true heroes, a larger pool of people to collect data, design future studies, and bring future treatments to those who need the help in difficult times.
So my question was going to be, why does participation in clinical trials matter? But I think you just summed that up so beautifully. And what a wonderful thing in memory of your friend. But you're absolutely right. You know, back in the 90s, this was the data that we had, the life expectancy. Now it's this. And those things don't get moved forward if people like yourself aren't participating in clinical trials. And kind of being okay with being uncomfortable, but knowing that taking that next step is necessary. What do you think what misconceptions about participating in a clinical trial do you think might be out there? Your coworker was hesitant.
Right. That it's gonna hurt. So, as I said, it wasn't that bad. Other misconceptions are that, there's just the too much unknown, and how are you going to be treated, during the trial? Do you walk in a door, is there a line of other people and you're, poked, given something, and then they draw your blood and it's just, sterile? But it wasn't, from my experience. Everyone explained what was happening at each step. They told me what they could share and what they couldn't share. It's just really supportive. It's like going to the doctor's office, really, and it's just a lot of different appointments in a shorter period of time. But everyone on the clinical trial team really made me feel comfortable. From the coordinator, to those taking care of my cells, to the ultrasound tech, to the doctors performing the procedure, and to Dr. McCoy. So I felt like a valued member on the team. I didn't feel like somebody standing in line getting, a shot or blood drawn from me. So I know that I'm only one person in this larger group of people. Most of you I haven't met. So if you're on the call and you are participating in this clinical trial, thank you very much. And just know, again, it doesn't hurt that much. The pain may be temporary, but it's really for the long-term gain. So, just it's how you make us feel comfortable. And I just want to say I was made to be very comfortable throughout the whole entire process.
That's wonderful to hear. What were some barriers to participation, or what can we, as the folks who are carrying out the activities of these clinical trials, do better?
So I think that for me, from my perspective right now, I think the barriers are how to get people into the trials. And participating in clinical trials, again, like I said, not on the top of my to-do list, but I think we have a marketing problem. How do we get the stories out there? How do we get my story, my coworker's story about the cystic fibrosis, and the countless other stories out there? So I think marketing, social media, the multiple contacts of how we get the right patients at the right time with the right mindset to care enough to participate. And that strategy that Dr. McCoy used with me, where she planted that seed, she watered it, and she let it grow for when the time was right. Not like the ophthalmologist who just said, think about it. And when I left the clinic, I stopped thinking about it. So, the participants, we need to grow the participants. I keep saying the word we, like I'm part of this larger team. So the participants are your helpers, which in the long term, again, like I've been saying, my theme of helping us, in difficult times. So that's the theme that I have had for the last couple of years, find the helpers, and it's going to be a much better community, society, actually. So I'm going to use my platform, basically, which I do all the time. I'm the first in the world for this clinical trial, and here's why clinical trials matter. So now I have that, my responsibility and this opportunity to help and assist get more people participating.
Well, you commented, you say well, you are a part of it. You are a huge part of it. And people like you coming and telling their stories is one step in doing exactly what we need, is that marketing out there, because we are afraid of the unknown. But when we hear your story, I think that helps us all to be better. So again, I just want to thank you for your participation, for your willingness to share and celebrating on Clinical Trials Day. I would like to invite Dr. McCoy. Are there any additional questions that you have for Julianne or Julianne for Dr. McCoy? Things that you would like to share with the audience about this journey?
Julianne, thank you. I mean, the way you spoke is just so inspirational, and I think everyone who's getting to listen to this will probably agree with that. So what do you think you could say to the next Sjögren's patient who, it's a really hard place to be in, as you know, to have very few therapies available. What would you say to them in general about participating in clinical trials as it relates to Sjögren disease?
So I am part of a few groups, Sjögren's groups online. And I think people are desperate and they are, devastated at the same time. And so I have mentioned, clinical trials are our way forward. And so when the media came out about this, I had a niece who she's in her 20s and she sent me something was on Substack or Reddit or I don't know where threads or something. And she goes, you don't have to respond to them. But I wanted to. I wanted to respond to them because they're all talking about, there's hope out there. And I wanted to respond, and yes, there is hope. And try to find I've spoken to people in North Dakota, South Dakota. They're very far away from a lot of these clinical trials, but how can you find something, anything to promote, our future treatments? And so that we're not on these, groups, these social groups complaining again about dry mouth, dry eye, digestive issues, other issues that we feel. Somebody just this morning was, I've got itchy skin. What do I do about it? Is this part of Sjögren's? And so it's just yes, you're there to help one another. And yes, it is part of Sjögren's. And let's try to figure out what the next steps are and finding those helpers, those right people. And the last Sjögren's Foundation, to put a plug in for them, the last newsletter that they'd sent out, they dedicated 2.5 pages to clinical trials and their importance and how you can, how and why you should join. And I think that's really important for people. So just, again, the media, the social media, getting the stories out there, just helping people become comfortable. Like it took me to become comfortable with Dr. McCoy.
Thank you both. I'm pretty sure we have some questions in the chat. Kevin, is that correct?
We do. First question we have is, this is for Julianne. What diet were you on after your diagnosis, and how helpful was it till you had the help that you needed? And they want to thank you for sharing your story.
Well, thank you very much. So I lost 50 pounds. I just stopped. I couldn't eat anymore. My body just said no more food. And it took me about 8 months to lose that 50 pounds, but I just couldn't eat. So my diet is very, very strict. And somebody in my household said, do I have to follow that diet? And I said, nobody should follow this diet. So I am gluten-free, dairy-free, corn-free, soy-free. I follow a low histamine diet. I limit my nightshades. And I try to, and then you're probably thinking, well, what do you eat? Well, it is a good time to be alive with these alternative diets. There's more restaurants out there that care, and there's more products on the shelf. Although my diet is the freshest as possible. The foods are, not processed. The freshest as possible. You go to the farmer's market, you find these farmers. I had a deer farmer up in River Falls, Wisconsin, where I lived, who she brought me back to life. The organic farmer did vegetables and meats and eggs. She had chickens and pigs and lambs. So I've been following it for 8 years, and it's really hard for me to go back to, yeah, I will never have a frozen pizza again. I will never have pizza again. Um, so so it's just really hard to go back to the diet that I was because my body won't let me. And I'm okay with that because I think I'm healthier now as far as my diet is concerned than I was before I was diagnosed with Sjögren's.
Thanks for that, Julianne. This is a question for Dr. McCoy. How far along are the trials, and how many of these types of trials are ongoing now? Has there been a breakthrough with treatment, or do you still have to use the patient's bone marrow for treatment?
So right now, this trial is in the very early stages, right? So we wanted to do a phase 1, and FDA said, well, hold on, first you have to make sure it's safe using half of the patients of these 2 glands, but actually there are more even in there as backups. And so really for us, as I think with many, the struggle is funding the trial. And so we'll finish this, and then it's my main job is to find the funds through grant mechanisms or other mechanisms to try to move this onward. So it has to go to a full phase 1 where we inject both. And then we hopefully show it's safe, and then we move on to a phase 2, which is where we actually expand it to more clearly look at how well it works. As Julianne mentioned, we still collect data. So whether it works or not, we actually can do a lot of neat things. Like I can look at her blood pre and post injection. Maybe I'll learn something else. We can look at saliva quality pre and post. Is anybody doing this in Sjögren's right now? No. There are other kinds of trials going on in autoimmunity. So there are IV injected stem cells to treat other autoimmune diseases like lupus. And then in the salivary gland injections, we have really great teams. The Cancer Center here has great clinical trial groups. That's who I get to work with. And there's another one in radiation-induced dryness that's injecting in the salivary glands right now, and that's in a phase 2. There is nothing so our goal is to, always develop the next step, make it better, make it better. But this is the most forward we have is harvesting your bone marrow and giving it to your salivary glands. So we haven't moved beyond that because we're just in the phase 1. But back in the lab, we're working on optimizing the pipeline and improving what we have available for our patients. We never stop working harder, but that's down at the bench.
Thanks so much, Dr. McCoy. Julianne, there are a couple questions that are fairly similar here. Folks on the call would like to know what researchers or research support staff, like clinical research coordinators, can do to make participating in studies easier and just make the whole experience a little more comfortable for participants.
I think it's all about that communication and it's just, healthcare IT project manager here. I'm speaking from that hat. You communicate and communicate and you communicate again. And you're going to communicate something that you've already communicated, but it depends on where I am when you're telling me that I have to be in a certain lab, and I'm at a different lab, and so therefore we can't find the supplies because I'm at the wrong lab. So I think the coordinators just the patients with us, and again, multiple communications. Here's the lab you have to go to. Here, make sure you show up at down at the UW clinic 30 minutes because you got to get through the parking ramp, and you don't want to be, then you have to find your location. So it'd be really great to have them meet us, at the door basically, or at the parking ramp, to get us where we need to be, because then now we're late because we're, spending a half an hour in the parking ramp. But it's just, be patient with us, the patients, because we don't do this every day. And it's just that open communication and reminding us, hey, you remember you have to be here at this time, and just that constant communication. And you don't necessarily have to hold my hand, but just remind me a couple of times, where I'm supposed to be and when.
Okay, I think that covers the questions that were in the chat. Just wait a few moments if you have anything that hasn't been answered. We've got a few minutes here. Feel free to drop your question into the chat. We'll just give it a few moments here.
So while we wait, again, I just want to thank everybody who does these clinical trials. Just the excitement that you all have shown me at every single encounter. I mean, every single person just excited that I'm here and excited that that I'm participating. And I'll tell a really quick story. When they were doing the bone marrow extraction, the nurse practitioner, she was running late. She said she had to go to a meeting. And I said, oh, you can miss that meeting. Or, you could be late to it. And she goes, no, I'm giving an update on you. And they're all waiting to hear about it. So I said, well, tell everyone hello.
Well, thank you for that, Julianne. There is one more question. One of the attendees is asking how your symptoms are at the moment.
So they stated it would be about 30 days after that I would experience something, and it was about 10 days afterward, and I'm preparing my food in my kitchen, and I'm like, what is in my mouth? I don't understand what this is. And it was a pool of saliva, and I was so excited. I'm like, it's working. And so I tell everybody now I can be spitting mad again. So for me, from my perspective, again, I everybody wants to be hopeful. And so, but we really have to look at the data to see, what happens. But my symptoms are much better. I don't cough as much. I don't have to, pop lodgings in my mouth as much. I actually have the opposite problem where I was drinking all the time. I think I'm dehydrating myself because I'm not drinking as much as I used to. So I am so hopeful that this is working because I feel like it is.
Dr. McCoy, what is the long-term follow-up?
So our ideal situation in therapeutically would be a curative therapy, right? And for this trial, our follow-up is 2 years. So it's a long follow-up for the trial, and that's largely because it's not been done in this patient population. And so, the FDA and ourselves want a longer follow-up to see how this works in our patients. And we'll get really, like I said, nice data because we'll look not only structurally at the salivary gland, how it responds, but also at all the biologic metrics. So I really like that Julianne pointed that out, is we really, whether it's one of those, it's a win-win situation. We learn something no matter what. And then hopefully the goal is we make our patients feel better, because that's what everybody who's on this call, I think that's our goal. And every cog in that machine really does a very important job. I can tell you there's not a member of any team I've worked in, and I have great teams that I could do without. So I'm very grateful for them. And for Julianne, you're a cog in that machine, as you can tell from how she talks about being part of the team.
Well, there aren't any more questions that I see, but there are a lot of thank yous in the chat for the discussion today, and I want to echo those. I especially want to thank you, Julianne, for not only being a clinical trial participant, but clearly an advocate, and for taking the time to share your inspirational story with us today. I just very, very much appreciate it. It's so important to hear from our clinical trials participants. I know this isn't the easiest thing to do, so we just very much appreciate you being a part of this today. And many thanks to Dr. McCoy and Tamara, for not only for the work you do every day, but for taking time out of your busy schedules to help us today, and just contribute to a really terrific discussion. And last but certainly not least, thanks to all of our attendees today for joining us, and thanks for the great questions. Before we close, I want to mention that there is a walk for Sjögrens that's coming up. It's June 21st. Dr. McCoy dropped a link to the registration in the chat earlier on in the chat if you want to go look at that. We'll also include a registration link in the follow-up email when we send the recording of today's session. And also, please, if you get a chance, subscribe to our newsletter at uwclinicaltrials.org. It'll help you stay up to date on news and events related to the clinical research community at UW and UW Health. We'll include a link to that in that follow-up email as well. Lastly, thank all of our panelists today. Thank all of our attendees. I hope you all have a wonderful clinical trials day and the rest of the week, and we will see you at our next forum. Thanks so much.